Have you ever noticed how losing someone can hurt less than staying attached to them? Not through anger, but through silence, distance, unanswered questions that echo at night. I have stood in that space before, mistaking attachment for love, longing for connection while slowly losing myself. The Stoics taught me something different. Not how to stop caring, but how to stop bleeding. Stay with me and let us look calmly at what it really means to detach. As we step into the first chapter, imagine the moment right after everything goes quiet. Not the peaceful kind of silence that rests the mind, but the heavy kind that presses against your chest and refuses to leave. The kind of silence that follows distance, unanswered messages, a presence slowly withdrawing until absence becomes louder than words. I remember standing in that space, telling myself I was fine, while my thoughts kept circling one person, one connection, one expectation. That was the first mistake. Because what unsettles us is never the silence itself, but what we secretly placed inside it. Now imagine asking yourself a question that feels uncomfortable the moment it forms. Why did their silence have the power to disturb your inner balance so deeply? Why did their absence feel like a loss of ground beneath your feet? The Stoics would not rush to comfort you here. They would slow you down. Marcus Aurelius wrote that it is not events that trouble us, but the judgments we attach to them. And when you sit with that long enough, you begin to see something unsettling but freeing. The pain was not only about them, it was about what you handed over. There was a time when I believed attachment was proof of love, that the intensity of my concern showed depth, that my willingness to endure uncertainty was a kind of virtue. But Stoicism dismantled that illusion piece by piece. What I called love often contained dependence, and dependence, no matter how poetic it sounds, is a fragile position. Epictetus warned that when you tie your peace to what you do not control, you place your inner life into external hands. Not symbolically, practically. Your mood rises and falls with another person's actions. Your sense of worth waits for their response. Your calm depends on their consistency. That is not love. That is exposure. Think about the last time you held on to someone who offered you little clarity. At first, the idea of losing them felt unbearable, like something precious was being taken away. But when time passed and the noise settled, what disappeared was not the person themselves. What vanished was the image you constructed around them, the imagined version, the future you rehearsed in your mind, the belief that patience would eventually be rewarded. Seneca warned that hope, when built on uncertainty, quietly erodes self-respect. You do not notice it at first, but over time, it drains you. I remember the moment when clarity arrived for me. It was not dramatic. It was quiet and sharp. I saw how often I had excused absence, how quickly I justified silence, how easily I painted warning signs white because acknowledging them would require action. That realization did not feel kind, but it felt clean. Because clarity does not negotiate. It ends confusion by removing fantasy. And in that moment, I understood something essential. I was not losing anything real. I was gaining sight. Here is where Stoic wisdom changes the direction of the story. Instead of asking why this happened to you, you ask what this revealed about you. That question does not blame. It instructs. The Stoics believed life repeats its lessons until they are understood. Miss the meaning, and the pattern returns wearing a new face. That is why so many people experience the same disappointment with different names attached. They call it bad luck. Stoicism calls it an unlearned lesson. I once watched a man move through the same collapse again and again. Different relationships, same confusion. Each time he believed the problem was external. Each time he avoided looking inward. And each time the cost grew heavier. When pain is ignored, it returns louder. But the moment you extract wisdom from it, something changes. Not the world. You. This is the part many resist. The lesson is not always about the other person's failure. Sometimes it is about the judgment you carried into the bond. Did their withdrawal expose how much reassurance you needed to feel stable? Did their inconsistency reveal how tightly you clung to validation? Did their indifference show you where your foundation was unsteady? Epictetus said that events do not disturb us, but our views about them do. Pain reveals the view you were living by. And in that revelation lies the chance to rebuild. For a long time, I believed that loyalty could compensate for uncertainty, that if I remained patient, understanding, unwavering, clarity would arrive. That belief was my error. Because when someone truly values you, you are not confused about where you stand. If you are always wondering, you are not standing anywhere at all. That truth did not arrive gently, but it freed me. Some of the most difficult people you encounter are not meant to remain in your life. They are meant to instruct it. The one who betrayed you teaches the weight of loyalty. The one who disappeared teaches the strength of indifference. The one who diminished you teaches you how tall you must become. Seneca wrote that fire tests gold and adversity tests character. Fire burns, but it also refines. Pain wounds, but it also shapes. Ask yourself honestly, would you have grown if they had stayed? Would you have built boundaries if they had treated you better? Would you have stopped chasing shadows if they had never turned away? Probably not. This is why gratitude in Stoic terms does not mean approving the harm. It means recognizing the lesson. Their actions forced you to confront a truth you avoided. Without them, you might still be negotiating your worth. Without them, you might still believe love must be loud, dramatic, and destabilizing. But reality is quieter, steadier, and far less exhausting. So let us say it plainly. What vanished was not the person themselves. What vanished was the image you constructed around them, and in losing illusion, you gained sight. Sight into your patterns, sight into your strength. Sight into the life waiting beyond what you once thought you needed. Pain is not your enemy. It is the examiner sitting silently while you wrestle with the answers. Pass the test and you move forward lighter. Refuse it and the same question returns. This is the first doorway of detachment, not erasing memory, not denying hurt, but reframing loss into instruction. When you stop wasting pain, you stop circling the same wound. You gather the lesson and rise carrying it. And once you learn to see people as lessons rather than losses, detachment stops feeling like a battle. It begins to feel like release. From here, the path moves toward something more demanding, creating the distance that allows wisdom to breathe. And that is where we go next. From here we move into the second chapter, and the air changes, because understanding the lesson is one thing, but creating the distance that allows it to settle is something else entirely. Imagine trying to tend a wound while reopening it every night, touching it, inspecting it, wondering why it will not heal. That is what happens when you say you are ready to let go, yet keep inviting the same presence back into your mind. The body may sit still, but the thoughts wander. And wherever the thoughts wander, the self follows. Now imagine this moment, late at night, when the world quiets down and your hand reaches for the familiar without thinking. Old messages, old images, old conversations replayed as if repetition might change their meaning. You tell yourself it is harmless, just curiosity, just one look, but each glance tightens the knot again. The Stoics would call this a failure of discipline, not because you are weak, but because you are divided. Marcus Aurelius warned that a mind scattered by impressions cannot remain free. Attention is not neutral. What you feed, it grows. I know this because I lived it. I once convinced myself I had moved on, yet every spare moment betrayed me. I studied silence like it was a puzzle, searching for hidden meaning, as if clarity could be extracted from absence. I mistook rumination for reflection, but reflection leads forward. Rumination circles. Seneca cautioned that we suffer more often in imagination than in reality. And I learned how true that was when nothing new was happening, yet I was exhausted every day, not by events, but by my own returning thoughts. Here is the Stoic truth that cuts through illusion. Healing does not begin with time, it begins with distance, not distance as punishment, but distance as medicine. Epictetus taught that we become the things we give our attention to. If your attention remains anchored to the past, your life will remain there as well. You cannot free yourself while keeping the chains polished, and chains, no matter how familiar, still bind. Consider this quietly. If someone truly valued you, you would not be here forcing detachment. You would not be bargaining with memory or decoding silence. People who wish to remain do not place you in confusion. Confusion is not mystery, it is information. And once you accept that, a different kind of discipline becomes possible. This is where restraint replaces hope. Not dramatic gestures, not declarations, just a quiet decision to remove access. You mute what pulls you backward. You step away from what keeps the wound open, not because you are angry, but because you are finished negotiating with pain. Every time you allow a thought to return unchecked, you give it shelter. And the mind, as the Stoics saw clearly, is the only territory you truly own. Why surrender ground you fought so hard to reclaim? I remember the moment I drew that line. There was no confrontation, no speech, no explanation, just a simple internal resolution. This chapter is closed. The first days were uncomfortable. The silence felt raw, like something had been removed before it was ready. But slowly, something unexpected happened. The mind, no longer fed familiar images, began to settle. The urge weakened. The pull softened. With each resisted impulse, strength returned. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. That power does not arrive all at once. It is built through repeated refusal to reopen doors that no longer serve you. Some days you will feel steady. Other days the memory will press harder. This is not failure. It is training. Each moment of restraint is a stone laid in the foundation of your self-command. Each moment you choose not to look back is an act of dignity. Here is where many misunderstand closure. They wait for an apology, an explanation, a final conversation that ties everything neatly together. But the Stoics never waited for external permission to move forward. Closure is not given, it is chosen. It is the moment you decide that your peace does not require their participation, not their words, not their understanding, not their return. Distance is not cruelty. Distance is clarity. It is the refusal to let your inner life become a museum for ghosts. It is the discipline to treat what has ended as finished, rather than a story you reread hoping for revision. Detachment is a mental contest, and the only way to win is to stop playing by rules that keep you stuck. As you reclaim the territory of your thoughts, something subtle shifts. The weight you carried begins to lift. The constant pull toward explanation loosens. Not because you have forgotten, but because remembering no longer rules you. You begin to feel whole again, not through replacement, through presence. And in that quiet return to yourself, a deeper challenge appears. When the noise fades and the distractions fall away, you are left alone with your own company. For many, this is the hardest test of all, learning to sit with yourself without fear, learning to see solitude not as emptiness, but as strength, and that is where the path leads next. Entering the third chapter, the noise finally fades, and what remains is the space most people fear to enter, a room with no voices to distract you, no messages to answer, no one waiting to be impressed or reassured. It feels unfamiliar at first, almost hostile, like standing alone under an open sky after years of shelter. The mind searches for something to cling to, some sound, some movement, anything to avoid the stillness. And that reaction alone tells you how rarely you have been truly alone with yourself. Now, imagine sitting there with nothing to perform and nowhere to escape, and ask yourself a question that cuts deeper than loneliness ever could. Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when there is no one left to validate my choices or soften my doubts? For many, that question feels heavier than heartbreak, because heartbreak at least has an object. Solitude has only a mirror. I used to fear that mirror. I mistook solitude for rejection, silence for punishment. I filled every quiet moment with noise, conversations that went nowhere, endless distractions, movement without direction. Each distraction felt like relief, but it came at a cost. The more I avoided being alone, the more power I gave others to define me. I handed them the authority to complete me, to steady me, to tell me who I was, and in doing so, I weakened myself. Marcus Aurelius wrote that nowhere you can go is more peaceful and free from interruption than your own mind. But peace, I learned, doesn't greet you immediately. At first, solitude exposes everything you have been avoiding: restlessness, regret, unanswered questions. Old judgments echo louder when there is nothing to drown them out. This is why so many run back to familiar chaos. It feels safer than facing what silence reveals. But Stoicism does not ask you to flee discomfort. It asks you to endure it with reason. Epictetus taught that strength is not built by avoiding difficulty, but by meeting it without surrender. Solitude, when approached this way, becomes training rather than exile. It strips away borrowed identities and leaves only what is yours. I remember the first evenings I chose to stay with the silence instead of escaping it. The urge to reach out was constant, to call someone, to scroll, to fill the space with borrowed presence. My body resisted, my thoughts protested, but I stayed. I let the quiet settle. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The restlessness softened. The silence stopped feeling like a threat. It began to feel honest. Think of solitude as a forge. Fire alone does not strengthen metal. Time in the fire does. Each moment you sit alone without distraction is a moment your mind learns it does not need external support to stand upright. Each moment you resist filling the space is a muscle built. At first, the weight feels unbearable. Then, gradually, it becomes manageable. Eventually, it becomes strength. Seneca warned that it is not that we have little time, but that we waste much of it. Noise is one of the greatest wastes. It scatters attention, fragments intention, and keeps you from seeing yourself clearly. Solitude, on the other hand, concentrates the mind. It sharpens judgment. It teaches you what you actually value when no one else is influencing the answer. There was a moment when I realized I had been using connection as a shield against self-examination. As long as someone else was present, I did not have to sit with my own doubts. As long as there was conversation, I could avoid listening to my own thoughts. But the Stoics understood something essential. A person who cannot sit with themselves will cling to anyone who distracts them, even if that person drains them. This is why solitude changes the quality of your relationships. When you no longer fear being alone, you stop tolerating what harms you. You stop negotiating your dignity for company. You stop accepting half-formed bonds just to avoid silence. Solitude does not isolate you, it liberates you from dependence. Epictetus said that if you want to improve, you must be content to appear foolish in the eyes of others. Solitude trains this discipline. Alone, there is no applause to chase, no image to protect. You act because it is right, not because it is seen. Over time, this builds a quiet confidence that cannot be shaken by absence or opinion. I began to notice the shift in small ways. I took walks without headphones. I ate meals without distraction. I spent evenings reading, writing, thinking, instead of filling the hours with noise. At first, time stretched uncomfortably. Then it expanded. I discovered thoughts I had never allowed myself to finish, questions I had avoided answering, and with each answer, something steadied inside me. Here is the truth solitude teaches, one most never learn. When you're comfortable alone, no one can control you with their presence or their absence. You stop fearing departure because you know you remain. That is the quiet danger of a self-sufficient person. Their peace is internal, their worth is not borrowed, their center cannot be displaced. This does not mean you withdraw from the world. Stoicism never asked for isolation. It asked for independence of judgment. When solitude becomes your ally, you choose relationships from strength rather than need. You engage without clinging. You care without losing yourself. You can walk away without collapse. Many mistake solitude for emptiness because they have never stayed long enough for it to become something else. But stay with it, and it transforms. It becomes clarity, confidence, calm. The noise that once felt necessary begins to feel excessive. You no longer rush to fill space, you inhabit it. History's strongest minds understood this. They carved out silence not because they were unloved, but because growth requires space. Solitude was their ground for reflection, discipline, and renewal. From it came vision and resilience, not spectacle, substance. And once you learn to stand firmly in your own company, another shift occurs. You become selective, not out of arrogance, but out of awareness. You begin to notice which voices elevate you and which pull you backward, which environments sharpen you and which dull you. Solitude teaches discernment. This is where detachment deepens, not as withdrawal, but as refinement. You no longer reach for others to complete you. You stand complete and choose deliberately who may walk beside you. And from that place, your standards rise naturally. The silence that once frightened you becomes home, and from that home, a new challenge appears. Learning how to choose the company that strengthens rather than drains you. Learning how to shape your environment so it reflects your future instead of your past, and that is where the path turns next. From here, the path shifts again, because once you have learned to stand comfortably in your own company, a new awareness begins to surface, quiet but unmistakable. The silence you once feared has sharpened your senses, and now you start noticing something you overlooked before. The weight of certain rooms, The way some conversations leave you lighter, while others drain you without a word being raised. It feels like walking into a familiar place and realizing the air itself has changed. Now imagine this. You sit among people you have known for years, yet instead of feeling supported, you feel subtly pulled backward. Their words circle old stories. Their questions reopen closed chapters. Their humor leans toward bitterness. And without meaning to, you feel your posture shrink, your energy dull, your mind drift back toward versions of yourself you worked hard to outgrow. That discomfort is not coincidence, it is information. Marcus Aurelius noticed this long before we gave it a name. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the quality of your thoughts shapes the quality of your life, but he also observed something quieter. Thoughts do not arise in isolation. They are influenced by what surrounds you, the conversations you tolerate, the attitudes you sit beside, the habits you absorb without noticing. Your soul, he said, takes on the color of its thoughts, and your thoughts take on the color of your company. I learned this lesson slowly, through resistance. There was a time when loyalty kept me in rooms that no longer fit. I told myself endurance was virtue, that staying was strength. But Stoicism does not confuse loyalty with self-neglect. Seneca warned that bad company is more dangerous than open enemies, because it enters unnoticed and shapes you from the inside. And once I allowed myself to see that clearly, something uncomfortable became obvious. Some of the people closest to me were quietly anchoring me to a past I had already outgrown. I remember one particular friendship. Every conversation returned to what had gone wrong in my life, what I had lost, who had hurt me. At first, it felt like understanding, like support. But over time, I noticed how each interaction left me heavier. My mind replayed old failures instead of imagining new paths. My focus narrowed, my energy dulled. Nothing dramatic was said, nothing cruel was done, and yet something essential was being taken. This is where Stoic detachment moves beyond individuals and becomes environmental. Detachment is not only about releasing one person, it is about shaping the space your mind inhabits. Epictetus taught that if you wish to improve, you must examine not only your actions, but the influences you permit. Because influence works quietly. It does not announce itself, it seeps in. Here is a difficult truth. You become the echo of the voices around you. Sit long enough among complaint, and complaint becomes natural. Sit among resentment, and resentment feels justified. Sit among discipline and responsibility, and you begin to rise without forcing it. Strength is contagious, so is weakness. And Stoicism demands that you choose carefully which one you allow near you. When I finally stepped away from that draining circle, there was no argument, no explanation, just distance. And in that distance, something remarkable happened. My thoughts cleared, my energy returned. The future felt wider again. Life did not suddenly become easy, but it became honest. I was no longer being pulled backward while trying to walk forward. This is where many misunderstand emotional detachment. They think it means isolation, cutting everyone off, building walls. But Stoicism never taught withdrawal from life. It taught selection. Detachment is not closing yourself off. It is deciding who earns access to your inner space, who is allowed to shape your attention, who is permitted to influence your direction. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to surround his mind with examples of virtue, not perfection, virtue, people who take responsibility, who adapt instead of complain, who acknowledge hardship without being defined by it. Being near such people does something subtle but powerful. Their steadiness stabilizes you. Their discipline sharpens you. Their forward motion pulls you out of stagnation without a word being spoken. Think about the people you admire most, not the loud ones, not the dramatic ones, but the steady ones, the ones who have been tested and did not turn bitter. They do not rehearse betrayal endlessly. They do not live in reaction to loss. They build, they move, they adjust, and being near them changes you. Not through advice, but through example. Seneca wrote that we should associate with those who make us better and avoid those who make us worse, even if they do so unintentionally. This is not cruelty. It is survival. Because if you remain in environments that resist growth, you will resist growth too. If you stay among those who excuse stagnation, you will begin to justify your own. Of course, this choice is not easy. Walking away from familiar faces carries a quiet grief. There is comfort in shared history, even when that history no longer serves you. But ask yourself honestly, what costs more? The discomfort of stepping away now, or the slow erosion of becoming someone you no longer respect? One price is temporary, the other compounds over time. I once delayed this decision out of fear of being misunderstood, fear of appearing ungrateful, fear of being alone again. But solitude had already taught me something essential. Being alone is not the same as being empty. And once that truth settles, you stop tolerating environments that drain you simply to avoid silence. As your circle changes, your identity begins to shift. Not because you are pretending to be someone else, but because you are no longer being pulled into old patterns. Conversations start to point forward. Energy begins to accumulate instead of leak. You stop defining yourself by what you survived and start focusing on what you are building. This is where true detachment takes root. Not in rejection, but in alignment. You align your environment with the person you are becoming, not the person you were forced to be. You guard access to your attention the way a fortress guards its gates. Not everyone is denied entry, but everyone is evaluated. And something unexpected happens when you do this. The right people begin to find you, not because you chased them, but because your standards made space. Those who cannot meet you where you stand drift away, frustrated by their inability to pull you backward. Those who can rise to meet you step forward naturally. This is not arrogance, it is clarity. You're no longer available for conversations that reopen wounds. You're no longer available for bonds that feed on weakness. You choose company that reflects strength, responsibility, and forward motion. And in doing so, you protect not only your peace, but your future. Ask yourself this, quietly and without judgment. Do the people around you expand your sense of possibility or shrink it? Do they remind you of your discipline or tempt you back into old habits? Do they reflect who you are becoming or who you have already outgrown? Your answers will tell you everything, because environment shapes destiny more than intention ever will. You can want change endlessly, but if you remain surrounded by forces that resist it, progress will always feel uphill. Stoicism does not ask you to fight every battle. It asks you to choose your terrain wisely. And once you have shaped your circle with intention, another challenge appears. Learning to stand firm without leaning, to resist the temptation to replace absence with distraction, to avoid rushing into new bonds before you are ready. The test of not escaping solitude, but honoring it. And that is where the path turns next. At this stage, the path narrows and the temptation becomes subtle, because once you have cleared space within yourself and reshaped your environment, the mind looks for relief. not wisdom, relief. Imagine running from a burning house only to step into another one, convinced that the heat feels different this time. The air seems lighter at first, the danger less obvious, but the fire is still there, waiting for attention to fade. Now picture this moment clearly. The quiet has settled, the old bond is gone, the silence is no longer unbearable, and then someone new appears. A fresh presence, new words, new energy. For a moment, it feels like movement, like progress, like proof that you are not stuck. But ask yourself honestly, are you choosing or are you escaping? The Stoics were sharp on this point. Seneca warned that he suffers more than necessary who suffers before it is necessary. Rushing into something new before you have finished standing on your own is exactly that. A suffering postponed, not avoided. Pain disguised as momentum. You believe you are moving forward, but part of you is still tied to what you left behind. I have seen this pattern repeat more times than I can count. Different faces, same outcome. People confuse loneliness with readiness. They mistake distraction for healing. They think proximity will erase memory, but memory does not dissolve because you replace the object. It dissolves when judgment changes, and judgment requires stillness. I lived this lesson the hard way. There was a time when I moved quickly after loss, not because I was strong, but because I was uncomfortable being alone with what remained. A new connection softened the edges for a while. Laughter returned. The nights felt less empty, but underneath, something was unresolved. And unresolved things do not disappear. They wait. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the mind takes the shape of what it focuses on. When your focus is divided between past attachment and present distraction, you cannot be fully present anywhere. Part of you lingers behind, replaying what was, comparing what is, measuring one against the other, and that division weakens you. This is why rebounds often leave you more hollow than solitude ever did. Alone, you face the truth. In distraction, you delay it. And delay comes with interest. The old expectations sneak into the new bond. The same hunger for reassurance appears. The same fear of loss returns. The pattern continues, only now the cost is higher because another person is involved. The Stoics would call this a failure of preparation. They believed that nothing should be entered without readiness of character. You do not step into a storm without armor. You do not walk into battle without discipline. And you do not invite another into your life while you are still dependent on what has already passed. I once watched a friend repeat this cycle for years. Each ending was followed by immediate replacement. Each replacement carried the same tension. At first, it looked like resilience. But over time, it revealed avoidance. The moment they finally paused, truly paused, something shifted. Alone, they confronted their habits, their standards, their assumptions about closeness. It was uncomfortable, but it was clean. And when they eventually chose again, it was not out of urgency, but clarity. This is the difference Stoicism insists on. Action from choice, not compulsion. Connection from strength, not need. Seneca wrote that true wealth is wanting little. The same applies here. When you no longer need another presence to steady you, every bond you form becomes purer. Not a crutch, a companion. Do not misunderstand this. Stoicism does not reject connection. It rejects dependence. It teaches you to become whole first, so that when you choose freely. A rebound often carries the energy of proof. Proof that you are desirable. Proof that you are wanted. Proof that you have moved on. But a Stoic does not live to prove. He lives to align. Ask yourself quietly, are you seeking company to share your strength or to hide your weakness? The answer is felt immediately. One brings calm, the other brings urgency. I remember the day I stopped trying to demonstrate progress and started embodying it. I chose growth over replacement. I traveled alone. I returned to disciplines I had neglected, training my body, sharpening my mind, rebuilding routines that did not depend on anyone else's presence. At first, it felt slow, almost boring, but beneath that simplicity, something solid was forming. Epictetus taught that freedom begins the moment you stop seeking outside what can only be found within. Completion does not arrive through substitution. It arrives through self-command. When you can sit with yourself without reaching outward, you gain something rare: stability. And stability changes everything. The desperation fades. The urge to rush weakens. You no longer need to convince yourself or anyone else that you are fine. You are fine, and from that place, desire becomes choice, not hunger. Here is the quiet truth most never hear. A rebound often delays the very relationship you are capable of having. Because until you stand firmly alone, you carry fragments of the past into every future bond. You project, you compare, you brace for loss. But when you arrive whole, something else becomes possible. Presence, trust without fear, affection without attachment. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the source of strength is always within, if you are willing to look. That strength is not loud. It does not rush. It waits until you are ready to use it well. And readiness cannot be borrowed from another person. It must be built. So pause here. Resist the urge to prove movement. Do not mistake activity for progress. Let the quiet finish its work. Let solitude complete its lesson. Because the strongest bonds are never born from urgency. They emerge when two complete individuals meet without need, without fear, without escape. From this ground, the path widens again. Once you stop running from silence and stop rushing toward replacement, you are left with something powerful: direction. The question then becomes not who will fill the space, but what you will build with it. And that is where we turn next. From here, something steadier begins to form, because once you stop rushing to replace what is gone, a deeper question rises to the surface, quiet but demanding. Imagine standing on cleared ground after a long storm, debris gone, air still, and realizing that nothing new can be built unless the foundation is chosen deliberately. Freedom creates space, but space without structure invites collapse. Now imagine this moment. You have detached. You are no longer reaching backward. The noise has faded. And yet, an old pull returns, subtle, familiar, tempting you to lower your guard. Not toward a person this time, but toward habits you once tolerated. Small compromises, excuses that sound reasonable, the kind that whisper, just this once. That whisper is not weakness. It is a test. The Stoics were clear about this stage. Detachment without principle is temporary. Marcus Aurelius wrote that if it is not right, do not do it, and if it is not true, do not say it. He was not speaking only about words and actions. He was speaking about the standards by which you live. Without them, freedom drifts. With them, it holds. I learned this after one of the hardest separations of my life. I had done the visible work, cut ties, created distance, chosen solitude. For the first time in years, my mind felt light. But then came the subtle danger, the temptation to return to familiar patterns under new names, to justify behavior I once promised myself I would never tolerate again. That was the moment I understood something essential. Letting go is not the end. it is the beginning. Stoicism teaches that character is not formed during crisis, but revealed by it. And after detachment, the crisis changes shape. It no longer asks, can you endure loss? It asks, can you uphold your standards when comfort returns? Can you remain aligned when temptation wears a friendly face? Think of standards as the architecture of your inner life. You do not build a fortress while under attack. You build it long before, stone by stone, gate by gate. After detachment, you must decide what will never again be allowed through those gates. Not out of fear, out of clarity. For me, those decisions were simple but firm. I would never again justify silence where actions were required. I would never again accept confusion as intimacy. I would never again negotiate my dignity for potential. These were not rules imposed on others. They were commitments made to myself. Seneca warned that we waste much of our lives repeating the same wounds because we never define what we will no longer tolerate. To detach is to stop the bleeding. To set standards is to prevent the wound from reopening. One ends pain. The other ends cycles. I once watched a friend move through endless disappointment, swearing after each one that it would be different next time. But nothing changed, because nothing was defined. Emotion led. Judgment followed. And the same pattern returned wearing a different face. It was only when that person chose to be precise about their standards that everything shifted, not immediately, but decisively. This is where many confuse standards with arrogance. They fear that clarity will make them cold, that boundaries will isolate them. But Stoicism does not ask you to build walls to keep everyone out. It asks you to build gates strong enough to let the right ones in. A life without standards is not open. It is exposed. Epictetus taught that the first task of philosophy is to decide what kind of person you intend to be, and then act accordingly. Detachment gives you the space to finally answer that question honestly. Not who you want to appear as, who you are willing to live as, even when it costs you. Here is the quiet truth. People will treat you according to the limits you accept. If your standards are vague, their respect will be too. If your values are negotiable, their behavior will reflect that. But when your standards are clear and consistent, something changes. You stop being an easy target, not because you threaten, but because you no longer bleed when cut. Clarity is magnetic. Those who cannot meet it will drift away, frustrated by their inability to pull you back into compromise. Those who can meet it will rise to it, not because you demanded it, but because you embodied it. This is not dominance. It is alignment. Do not mistake this for perfection. Stoic standards are not about seeking flawless people or flawless conditions. They are about refusing to abandon yourself. They are about knowing your worth so deeply that you would rather stand alone in peace than kneel in company that drains you. Once you experience that peace, compromise begins to feel heavy, almost unnatural. Take the silence that detachment has given you and use it well. Write your principles down, not as ideals, but as commitments. What behaviors will you no longer excuse? What patterns will you walk away from without explanation? What values will guide your choices when emotion tries to take control? The world will test you again. Old faces may return. New ones may arrive wearing familiar masks. And in those moments, your standards will be your shield. Not loud, not aggressive, just immovable. As I look back now, I see the pattern clearly. Before standards, every detachment was temporary. I left, only to return in another form. After standards, detachment became permanent freedom. The door closed, and with it, the noise. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to live in accordance with nature, meaning to live in alignment with reason and virtue. That alignment creates a calm strength that does not need validation. You stop waiting to be respected. You begin living in a way that demands it quietly. And from that place, something new begins to rise. When your values are firm, your energy shifts. You're no longer leaking attention into what does not serve you. You are no longer scattered by temptation. The question then becomes not what you will avoid, but what you will build. Because detachment does not empty you, it returns energy to you. Energy once spent maintaining weak bonds, managing confusion, and justifying compromise. And once that energy is reclaimed, it demands direction. That is the next challenge. Not who you will let go of, but where you will invest your strength. Not everyone is ready to walk it. From here, the path opens into something unfamiliar, because once your standards are set and your inner ground is firm, a different force begins to rise. Energy, the kind that was once scattered across worry, waiting, explaining, and hoping. Now it has nowhere to leak. It gathers, and gathered energy always asks the same question: where will you direct me? Now imagine the quiet evenings after detachment, the hours that once disappeared into messages, memories, and rehearsed conversations suddenly stand open. At first, that openness feels restless. Your body wants movement. Your mind wants distraction, not because you are weak, but because unused power is uncomfortable. Most people mistake that discomfort for emptiness. It is not. It is raw material. The Stoics understood this deeply. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts, but thoughts do not float freely. They are fueled by attention and effort. When attachment dissolves, attention returns to you, and attention, if left unguided, will drift back toward longing, resentment, or regret. If guided, it becomes creation. I remember the first time I felt this shift clearly. After stepping away from a bond that had drained me, I suddenly had long stretches of uninterrupted time. At first, I wasted them. Old habits pulled at me, familiar distractions whispered for relief. But something had changed. Those habits no longer satisfied me. They felt thin. And that dissatisfaction was a signal. It meant I was ready to build. Epictetus taught that freedom is not granted. It is practiced. And practice requires directing effort toward what strengthens you. Detachment hands you big energy you once wasted on what you could not control. Now the responsibility shifts, not to avoid pain, but to use it. There are only two outcomes for energy. Left idle, it decays. Invested, it transforms. The Stoics never romanticized growth. They understood it as discipline repeated when motivation fades. This is where many stumble. They stay busy, but do not become better. Stoicism asks for more than movement. It asks for direction. I once knew a man broken by separation. For months, he replayed conversations and waited for something to change. Then, one morning, exhausted by his own mind, he made a quiet decision. If pain was unavoidable, it would at least produce something useful. He began running before sunrise, pouring the ache into each step. At night, he studied skills he had postponed for years. Slowly, almost invisibly, he changed. The loss did not disappear. It was repurposed. Seneca wrote that difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. Pain does not vanish on its own. It must be shaped. If you do not shape it, it will shape you. This is the difference between those who grow stronger and those who grow bitter. One uses adversity as material. The other carries it as weight. This is not about drowning yourself in activity to avoid reflection. Stoicism does not teach escape. It teaches transmutation. You do not deny the energy. You do not suppress it. You redirect it, like a river guided into channels that nourish fields instead of flooding villages. The same force that once pulled you toward attachment can now build something enduring. Training the body is one path. It teaches patience, endurance, and respect for limits. Training the mind is another. Reading deeply, writing honestly, thinking without distraction, building a craft or discipline that does not depend on approval. Each hour you once spent waiting for someone else can now be invested in becoming someone steadier. Here is a truth many resist. Growth is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It happens in quiet mornings when you choose discipline over comfort. In evenings when you resist looking back and move forward instead, one deliberate action at a time. Stoicism respects this kind of progress because it lasts. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily to rise and do the work of a human being, not the work that brings applause, the work that builds character. When you redirect your energy this way, something subtle happens. The pull of the past weakens, not because you forced it away, but because you filled the space with purpose. I noticed this in myself. As I committed to routines that demanded presence, the cravings to return to old patterns faded. Not instantly, but steadily. A mind engaged in creation loses interest in rumination. When your days are structured with intention, nostalgia loses its grip. The past becomes quieter, not erased, but outgrown. This is where many misunderstand detachment. They think it is only subtraction, removing people, removing habits, removing pain. But detachment without construction is incomplete. You clear ground so something better can stand there. Otherwise, the same weeds return. Ask yourself this without judgment. What are you building with the energy you reclaimed? Strength, skill, stability, wisdom, or are you letting it drift back into distraction? The Stoics believed every moment is a vote for the person you are becoming. No moment is neutral, and here is the paradox. When you invest your energy into growth, the need for validation fades. You stop measuring yourself by who stays or leaves. Your worth becomes internal, quiet, unshakable. From that place you engage with the world differently, not to be filled, but to contribute. Pain wasted is pain repeated. Pain invested becomes power. That is not optimism, it is discipline, and discipline practiced daily reshapes a life. As you build, another challenge emerges. When strength increases, attention follows. Opinions appear. Judgments from others begin to press in. Some admire, some resent, some misunderstand. The next test is not how you handle loss or solitude, but how you stand when the noise returns from a different direction, and that is where the path leads next. Letting go is not losing love, it is choosing peace. What you practiced here is quiet strength and self-respect. If this resonated, consider subscribing to continue this journey. Share 2 words below. Choose peace. Walk forward lighter. The next lesson is waiting.